everybody. Welcome back to episode 5 of Get Your Faith in the Game podcast. If this is your first time checking us out, we are glad that you're here, hoping to see what this is all about. If you are a returner, you've watched a couple of episodes, welcome back. We're glad you're checking us out again, but we're so excited to get into episode 5. But if you haven't watched episode 4 with Chase and Gavin from the baseball team, I highly recommend going back and watching that because that was a great conversation on just how to share your faith boldly, and that was a great conversation now leading into today's conversation. So, as always, I'm going to throw it over to Clayton and introduce our guest and talk about our topic today. So, Clayton, how's it going, dude?
Doing great. What up, everybody? Happy to be here on episode 5. Our special guest today, very special guest to Zach and I. Yeah, his name is Matt Howe. He's the state director for FCA in Ohio, and he's also our direct supervisor. So, Matt, welcome on the podcast. How's it going?
Going really well. A little confused about why it took so many episodes for me to get invited in, but I promise not to dock your pay based off of that. So that was a bucket list item for me. Faith in the Game podcast, this was one I wanted to get in before I died. So the good news is I'm here and I made it.
Check it off.
So yeah, man, we're good to go. So yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So Matt, go ahead and tell them a little bit about your family and just where you live, all that kind of stuff.
So I'm old as dirt, 43 years old, be 44 this summer, and married for almost 22 years to my high school sweetheart, who is also a second grade teacher and works very hard. And then I've got 4 kids. My oldest is a sophomore at Miami University here in Oxford, Ohio. And then I have a junior in high school, 8th grader, and a 5th grader. So 2 girls, 2 boys. My girls bookend my boys. So we're busy in the sports world. Baseball this weekend will be our entire life. We'll just be baseball and volleyball and track and golf and you name it. We're playing it. So life gets crazy.
So tell us a little bit about like your past in ministry. Obviously, you worked in ministry for a long time. FCA now for going on 4 years.
5 in September. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So tell us kind of your ministry background and how you got in FCA as well.
Yeah, for sure. So when I was in college, was kind of heading in one direction, I guess, and then actually at an FCA meeting in college, just really felt stirred to consider full-time ministry as a vocation, and ended up making that switch. It was like my sophomore year in college, and got out of school and immediately went into student ministry and started working at local churches. Did that for about 18 years in a variety of different roles, and then back in 2019 accepted the call to come into FCA work here in Cincinnati, and then that's kind of since moved along and became the state director back in May of 2023. So, yeah, man.
We asked Jacob, so Jacob was on the first episode, and we asked him, because he's been here 3 years, kind of how FCA has grown in Cincinnati over the time he's been here. How have you kind of seen FCA grown from when you kind of started to kind of where you're at now?
I'd like to think it's grown in a number of ways. You guys are certainly a big part of that, as well as some of the other staff that we've hired. Our team was pretty small when I stepped in, and not just our staff team, but our volunteer team, those who are out there, boots on the ground, doing the work of ministry with FCA. So in that sense, I mean, when you have more staff and you have more members on the team, you can obviously get more work done, more ministry done. So that's probably been the single biggest way. It's just more staff, more volunteers. Our advisory board has grown. Our number of constituents, donors, supporters, has grown. So that's allowed the ministry to really expand. And just really excited for especially the growth we've seen this year in the school year, and getting out and connecting with several high schools, and also down at UC and other places as well. So I think the best is ahead of us for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. What would you say is the hardest thing about working in a ministry like FCA, maybe opposed to working as a student minister?
Well, we're talking about leadership today, and I think to some degree you have to be a self-leader. You have to really kind of keep yourself motivated and keep yourself on track. There's not a lot of people looking over your shoulder, which I think a lot of people would be like, oh, that sounds awesome. Nobody really micromanaging what I do and watching over my shoulder, but there's also challenges that come with that. It'd be real easy for me just to sit at home on the couch all day long and just watch SportsCenter over and over and over again. But that's not what Christ has called me to do, and that's not what I would feel good about. So As long as you're a person who's a self-starter and able to kind of get yourself going in the morning and, kind of lay out your day, what you're going to be doing, where you're going to be going, who you're going to be talking to, then you'll be fine, and if you're not, then this job may be a little bit challenging for you. And we've seen that with some of our hires in the past. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we've kind of alluded to, our episode today is going to be about servant leadership. So it's fitting that we have our leader, our leader in this FCA ministry.
Do you want me to wash your feet real quick?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. No, but Matt, what do you kind of think is kind of a common misconception about leadership, or maybe where people would go wrong in a leadership role?
So I think that whole, I'm sure you guys have heard this, leaders are born, not made. Mm-hmm. And I disagree with that. I think certainly, there are things about the way God's created us and crafted us that maybe make for the potential for us to be stronger leaders or more out front leaders. But I think everyone can develop, and everyone should develop certain leadership skills. And, I'd like to think that at 43, I'm a better leader now than I was, at 23 when I first kind of started into ministry. And, a lot of that has just come through experience. It's come through a lot of conversation, conversations like this, where just kind of sitting around a table and talking about, like, what is the art of leadership, and what really works and what doesn't work, and what challenges have you faced, and so on and so forth. And we grow that way, our entire life long. And so, I think that idea that, if I'm not a naturally upfront person, or I'm not a very, extroverted person, or a person who feels comfortable in all settings and situations, then I can't lead. And I don't think that's true at all, because I think, as we talk about athletes, some of the best leaders are the ones who just lead by example. They're quiet, they keep their head down, they do what they're expected to do every day. We had one of those in Cincinnati for the longest time, Joey Votto, who was a leader and wasn't really vocal, and he took a lot of criticism for that. But at the end of the day, when you talk to any player who played with him, they would tell you Joey led by example. We never doubted what we had in him as a teammate. And I think those are the underrated leaders of our time, those who are quiet and a little more behind the scenes, but no less influential.
Absolutely. Yeah, so as always, we want to get into Scripture. We see this concept of servant leadership modeled by Jesus in John chapter 13, verses 3 through 5. It says, Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. So I think this is just a crazy concept. Jesus knew that his hour was near. Like, he knew that he was going to die, that he had to die because of his love for us sinners. He knew his hour was coming, and he didn't, just get started on his bucket list, right? He didn't say, I've done enough for everybody else. I'm gonna take some me time. No, he got up and began to serve his disciples by washing their feet. And I just think that's, we don't know the hour or time when we're going to the Father, right? We don't know when our time is going to come. Jesus knew, and he chose to serve, to wash feet. So what would you guys consider the most important aspect of servant leadership?
I think just keeping yourself postured there. If you look at the life of Christ, he never really left the posture of a servant leader. He was always ready to serve at any moment's notice. It was just a part of his DNA, a part of who he was. It was as normal as eating and sleeping and breathing to him, to serve. And that's tricky, because for me, I'll admit that's not the case. I think my natural tendency would be to want to be served, not to serve, and there's a lot of humility that comes with serving. There's a willingness to sort of put your own agenda and your own ideas and your own, accolades kind of beside you and behind you, and just say, what, it's not about me. It's about the other people that, work with me or work under me or work beside me. And, that's challenging, but it's incredibly important to always just sort of be in that posture where at any moment's notice, like you're ready to just drop down and wash feet, and that, a lot of people don't know this, but that was a thing that was even below really the servants of the day. Even the lowliest servant didn't really always have to, or wasn't always expected to do the foot washing. You think about the things that their feet had on them, in that day and time. And it goes way beyond just dust and dirt. If we walked barefoot, we'd probably be okay. But they walking barefoot. I mean, it's animal feces, it's everything, you know, it's the lowest of the low. And so for him to willingly just take the towel, take the basin, and go and do that, I mean, it's pretty incredible visual, you know, for his disciples to see him do that for sure.
Yeah, I think when Jesus, well, obviously Jesus is the perfect example, but even when talk about servant leadership, we kind of use that word to kind of describe something, which then kind of hints that there's a different type of leadership. But I think even just saying that leadership is someone that willingly serves all the time, just like Jesus did, should be the word we use. It's you're a leader. Oh, okay, so you serve anyone and anyone as much as you can. That is someone, what is a servant or a leadership does. And like you said, that's so challenging to do because, I mean, I for me, even as someone as a boss, like, I think it's easier for me to say, okay, you're my boss. I'm going to try and serve you as best as I can because you're above me. But it's a lot harder for me to humble myself where the people I'm ministering to or people younger than me to say, okay, my job is to fully serve you as well and not just expect for something in return because I'm your boss or I'm in charge. And so that's something that Jesus did not or does not do at all. He serves everyone, does not care if you're a servant, if you're a high priest, if you're one of the disciples, in that time, if you're a woman, like, he fully said, I'm here to serve you. And like you said, Clayton, like, took his time, knew that he was about to die, and said, all right, I'm going to use this time I have left to serve. Because it's so common, too, I feel like when people get older, too, oh, man, you know, I might have 10, 20 years. I have a bucket list I need to try to accomplish. What if our bucket list was just to serve everyone that we meet?
Absolutely. That's profound. Yeah, and I think, you know, a lot of times we may overcomplicate service. Like, it's like you got to go to the soup kitchen or you got to go, like, give blankets to the homeless, like, what, you know, go on a mission trip. Like, all those are good things, right? Like, in this example, in this passage, Jesus was simply, like, with his guys, you know, with his friends, with his closest allies, and found a way to serve them in that moment, you know? It wasn't like he did something extravagant. Like, he's capable of healing the blind, healing the lepers, you know, raising people from the dead. Like, he did all of those things, but he also did the simple things like washing dirty, stinky feet, you know.
And Matt, once you say that, like I think people say, oh, Jesus, you know, was in ministry, obviously doing that. We're in ministry serving, so it comes, you know, it's part of our job title, but everyone needs to serve because everyone that's chasing Jesus has to try to be like Jesus. So the people listening, how do you kind of give other examples outside of the typical soup kitchen, giving blankets to homeless, giving money to homeless? How do you give examples to people that are listening that even in the normal job and in their school day, on their teams, like how can they serve people right now?
Yeah, well, even before you get into that, I think it just starts with loving people, because I think if you really grow in your love for people, and when I say people, not just your family, your friends, the people you're close to, but just people, humanity, right? The more you grow in your love for people, then the more you're actually naturally going to grow in your service to people and for people. And so, you know, when we think that the greatest commandment was to love God and the second one was to love our neighbor as ourselves, you know, like, what does that practically look like? Well, it looks like a life of service. You know, it looks like a life of always looking to the interest of other people and always saying, what is that thing that they might need in this particular situation or in this particular circumstance? And so, you know, I know being married for as long as I have now and having 4 kids, I mean, that's taught me as much as anything about, you know, what it really looks like to serve, you know, because as a husband, as a father, I mean, if I want that marriage to not just be a piece of paper, but to really be a fruitful, you know, life-giving thing, then I've got to constantly be looking to my bride and saying, how can I make her day better? How can I make her, whatever the chore is that she's doing, easier? How can I make her life, you know, better? And doing that that's a lot. There's a lot of sacrifice. You know, that means sacrificing a lot of the me in the situation. You know, and saying, hey, I'm going to put my own thing that I'd like to be doing, or my own agenda, or my own you know, desire aside, so that I can really focus more on, you know, what is it that this person needs. And it's like any habit. I think the more you practice it, the better you become at it. So I think with service, you know, you might be wondering, like, well, what is that thing? Maybe serving at a soup kitchen is a start, you know, doing something like that for someone that's very intentional, that's very planned out, that's very, you know, there's a lot of preparation that goes into it. Those things are fine. but understand those are just the breeding ground for a life of service. Those are the breeding ground for, okay, now I build this whole service aspect into my life where literally I'm walking across campus or I'm at my high school or I'm at my middle school or I'm sitting in my cafeteria or on my school bus and I'm just constantly aware of the things going on around me. I think that's probably the biggest thing as a young person. Sometimes we sort of put those blinders on and we only see the thing that's right in front of us and we only see the thing that matters to us. And we fail to see humanity around us and the things that are happening and the hurts and the hang-ups of the people around us. And so being able to sort of take those blinders off and really see people for where they are and for what they are and for what they're going through. And that's part of loving people. And then in turn, that will lead to service opportunities. It will lead to no-brainers of, man, that kid's having a hard day. I need to go over there and put my hand on their shoulder and just tell them that, I appreciate them and appreciate, and understand what they're going through. Or, hey, that kid just dropped his books. I'm going to go over there and help him pick them up. I mean, it's the simplest little things, but all of a sudden there's this switch, there's this change that happens, this transformation that happens. And others will see that, others will recognize that, and there'll come a day when people say, man, I love Zach or I love Clayton, because they're never really concerned about themselves. They're only ever concerned about me, or they're only ever concerned about the people around them and making them better and making their quality of life better. And that's the true definition of service, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like you talked about changing your mindset to notice the things around you so you can serve those around you better. Grant, who works with us down at UC, works for Athletes in Action. He made the point this week as we're trying to kind of equip our college students to grow this summer. He made the point, like, you're not going to accidentally grow in your faith, right? Like, it's not just going to happen by, like a happenstance. Like, it takes genuine effort and, like, showing up to read the word, showing up in prayer, and showing up in service. Like, it's not going to happen by accident, right? It takes a conscious effort to show up, to meet God in those places. And I think the same thing comes along with service, right? You're not going to accidentally find yourself serving. Like, that's not going to just randomly be your mindset, is to, like, serve and love people. It's a posture you have to actually put on and, like, consciously change the way that you go about your life. And, the world wants us to, or the world kind of promotes building your own kingdom or serving yourself, do what's best for you. And that's something as Christians that we got to take off and put on a posture of humility, like Jesus did in this passage where he's, the Son of God. He's fully God, and he's, washing stinky feet. I think it's a posture we put on.
Yeah, you talk about heart posture a lot, and I've had a pastor tell me before, like, when you're kind of struggling, like, if you feel like you're not living for Jesus and towards living like Jesus, go back to where you first fell in love with Jesus, where you first started a relationship with Jesus, and remember that feeling you had when you finally felt free, you finally felt redeemed, and that fire you had to just go out and tell people about Jesus, that fire to go out and say, I want to love people like Jesus, and go back to that heart posture to kind of just reset yourself and say, okay, Jesus died for the cross of me. Jesus gave me a great example for who he was, and because of what he did in my heart, and I remember that fire he did for me, and what he did for me to save me, I'm now going to be able to have a heart posture to go back out and try to live more like Jesus.
Absolutely. Yeah, it says in Philippians 2, verses 3-4, it says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. I think that's pretty powerful there by Paul. So contradictory to the world's view, and even the thought of servant leadership kind of seems like a contradictory statement. Like, to me, leadership sometimes gets misconstrued as, like, whoever talks the loudest, right? Whatever voice is the loudest, like, that's the leader. When in reality, the Bible, calls us to serve first. So that's the whole concept of servant leadership. But, the whole point, like, if the Bible aligned with the world, then, like, what would be the point, right? So the Bible contradicts the world, calls us to change our ways. And so that's kind of the point, is, like, taking that true heart change from God's word to consider others' needs more important than our own. So Matt, to you, what's kind of the ultimate goal of service?
I think we want people to see Christ in us, right? And so the way they're going to do that is by seeing Christ likeness. And what's more Christ likeness than service? And so, as we're thinking about a world that is kind of in turmoil a little bit, a little chaotic out there, as we're thinking about the issues that we face, spiritually, relationally, politically, I mean, you name it. A lot of those issues would be resolved if we would really be willing to put aside, our differences, put aside our agendas, and really just love and serve one another. And it sounds so simple, and yet it's so complex and it's so difficult to do. And, as you guys were talking just a second ago, Romans 12 popped in my head. In Romans 12, Paul talks about being transformed by changing the way we think. It's a mind transformation, and that we'll be able to test and approve and know what the good will of God is when we are able to change how we think. And I think if I think about how I think in the course of a day, I spend a lot of time thinking about myself. My wants, my desires, my plans, my agenda. What am I going to eat for lunch? What am I going to do after the kids are off school and home? What am I going to do when my wife gets off work? What am I going to do? What do I want? What do I want to watch tonight on TV? What do I want? I mean, it's just so many of my thoughts are wrapped up in myself. And honestly, the way that I would pray that God would change me from the way I think is to think about myself a lot less, and think about others a lot more. How can I make sure that not just my family and the people that I'm closest to in relationship, how can their lives and quality of life be better? But how can even just the random people out on the street, the random people that I pass in the grocery store, or, whatever it is that I'm doing, if I'm sitting at a baseball tournament this weekend, the people that I might be sitting next to, or the people that might be there supporting the other team, that we're playing, or just how can I look for opportunities to really intentionally care for those people and love on those people and serve those people? Because that's just who Christ was. He did not, he occasionally withdrew, and spent some time with God, getting filled up, and then he would come right back at it and was right back in the face of people, and just really wanted to take as much time as he could to just love and care and serve for those people. So I think that's the key of leadership, and that's the key of service, is just having a them mentality. It's not about me, my wants, my desires, my plans, my agenda, but my goals, my vision, but it's really about the collective good of the people working with me and working beside me and, working under me and things like that. So
you talked about in the beginning of the episode about leaders can be made. And so what's some practical tools that you think have helped you in your life that you could tell people listening to try to become a better leader and a better, obviously, servant leader as well?
Yeah, I think it starts with thinking about who you want the people to be that are leading you, So if you think about the people that you work for, or the people that, your professors, teachers in school, your coaches, the people that are pouring into and investing in you, I mean, even your own parents, it starts there by saying, okay, what about them do I like? What about them do I think, man, someday when I get a chance, I'm going to do it a little different, So just being a really good, what's the word I'm looking for? Observer, just really being observant and seeing the good and the bad that's out there and learning from it. I think that's huge. That comes with repetition. It comes with experience. Certainly you can't, experience is a great thing. I would encourage our kids who are attending our huddles, who might be a little nervous about, stepping up front and leading a session, on a Thursday morning or whatever. What's the worst thing that can happen? Go for it, because the more opportunities you get to lead now, then you're just going to be, that much further ahead into the future. So looking for things like that. Certainly the Word of God, has a lot to say about leadership and about how to treat people and how to relate to people. So I think, being in the Word and spending time in the Word is definitely important. Obviously there are books out there written by some incredible leaders, pastors, business leaders, CEOs. I would encourage you to find one that has a faith backing, because how a CEO in the secular world might lead versus how a CEO who has a Christ-centered, serving out of a Christ-centeredness might lead a little differently. So, if there's books to read, there's conferences to attend. I mean, I've done it all, and it's all beneficial, and there are nuggets I take from everything. But I think at the end of the day, nothing really replaces just getting in the trenches and just finding opportunities to lead and to serve and to work beside and with people.
No doubt. That's great. Yeah, when you think about, you alluded to it earlier, but ultimately the process is like getting to know Jesus and trying to emulate him, right? And the only way we're going to be able to live a life that resembles Jesus is if we have a relationship with him, like a deep, intimate, like relationship, right? So the relationship defines the resemblance. So the only way that we're going to be able to be a servant leader is if we are in Christ, right? Truly valuing others as more important than ourselves, like taking on that code of humility. The only way that happens is if you are in Christ. I think, I got a little story here. Dan Britton, who's the chief field officer for FCA, he's very vocal on social media, but he was working at a camp, and there was a 7th grader that stepped up. It was an open mic night at the camp to kind of say like how they had grown or what had kind of impacted them from the camp. And so 7th grader stepped up as a 13-year-old boy, and he walked up and he said, "If you ain't serving, you ain't leading," right? and Dan Britton's kind of taken that, and he's written multiple devotionals and stuff like that, and he's emulated that, and he shares it all over the place in his ministry and stuff like that. And I think, if we're going to leave you with anything, if you ain't serving, you ain't leading, right? That's the ultimate goal of leadership. Should not be to make yourself great, right? It should be to make those that you are leading, to serve them as best as you can. Absolutely. Yeah. So Matt, we kind of asked this to our college athletes, and I'm interested to hear what you'll say about this. But if you could give advice to your 17-year-old self, what would you say?
Slow down. I would say, all the things that you're dreaming for and hoping for and wanting to see come to fruition, they'll happen most likely, but don't be in a rush for them to happen. Just enjoy where you are, the whole bloom where you're planted concept, but, take it slow. Understand that there's a reason why we reap what we sow. There's work to be done in the sowing seasons of life. You have to be out in the fields working and planting and preparing, so that when, the time comes and the time is right, you'll be able to reap a harvest. And that doesn't have to be overnight. That doesn't have to be next year. That doesn't have to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now. God's pretty good about giving you things when you're ready for them, but sometimes we just get really anxious and really excited. And I think there's a lesson I've learned over and over and over again throughout adulthood. It's just to just slow down and just be okay with the way things are now, understanding that they won't always be that way, and that there will be another day ahead, and there will be times for the things that you want in life and that you desire in life. And if the time's not right now, that's okay, right? Make the most of what you do have, and make the most of where you are and what you're doing. So, coming out of high school, coming out of college, I think I wanted the moon, and everything that comes with it. I wanted to be married. I wanted a family. I wanted a home. I wanted a nice car. I wanted a good job. I wanted it all. And some of it I chased after a little too hard, a little too fast. And I think had I slowed down a little bit and just kind of taken it a little slower, I think I would have probably been better off. Slow down.
Yeah, Matt, I just want to speak encouragement to you that, I've known you 3 years now. And I just told Clayton the story yesterday, actually, that the first day I walked in with golf shorts, polo, all tucked in, nervous and scared. And by like day 3, I felt fully comfortable where I was at.
You weren't showering.
You were. I was fully comfortable where I was at because the type of leader you were quickly in 3 days, and now 3 years. I know both of us have a ton of respect for you, and just as mentors, as leaders for our lives, but also just a great example of what servant leadership look like. I've seen you do a lot of different roles just in the short couple years, and you've always been the boss, but you've always done the couple different roles that not a lot of bosses might not do. And so we respect you a lot, and so just thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, if I could add one more thing, I would just say, in addition to slowing down, just don't take yourself too seriously.
You do that well.
I've been around. Yeah, you've been around those people that just, man, they think they know it all. They think they got it all figured out. And I think that was me in my 20s. But I think I've just realized, man, I don't know anything. Like I'm just stupid, you know, and that's okay, you know, because what I love is when a team comes together and just says, you know what, we're all going to figure this out together.
Yeah.
We're all going to learn this together. We're all going to experience it, the successes, the failures, everything. And we're going to come back together and we're going to regroup and we'll be better for it. So, yeah.
That's kind of what we're going to talk about on episode 6.
Look at that.
The beginning of wisdom. He already knew. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so we appreciate y'all checking out episode 5, Servant Leadership. FCA's Get Your Faith in the Game, and we appreciate Matt coming alongside us for this episode. We'll remind y'all, if you ain't serving, you ain't leading. All right? God bless.